By the time anyone realized the moon wasn't right, she was already changing, and if you're hearing this, you've already stepped into whispering narratives, the place where the stories towns like this try to bury keep clawing their way back to the surface. It didn't look wrong at first. The nights just stretched a little longer over Dry Creek, the shadows holding on a few extra seconds when the streetlights snapped on. Dogs started barking at corners where nothing moved. The air felt like it was listening. Only later, much later, would anyone talk about how the light had gone thin and metallic, how it stopped feeling like moonlight and started feeling like something watching back. On the first night it howled. It did it from behind their house. It sounded too close, too long, too deliberate. Not a coyote, not a dog, not anything that belonged to the world the town thought it lived in. The sound crawled under paint and plaster, shook dust from the attic beams, made the glasses in the kitchen cupboards tremble just enough that you weren't sure if they had. People all up and down Pine Street woke up with their hearts racing, listening for a second cry. Only 2 of them heard what came after. In the little blue house with peeling trim at the edge of the map, a brother sat up in bed to that sound, lungs locked, while his sister in the next room whispered a word that wasn't any language he knew. Something answered her from beneath the floor. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. Dry Creek sat in a bowl of pines and shale, the kind of place maps forgot and storms remembered. Every diner napkin had a story. Hoof prints on roofs, eyes in the irrigation ditches, something that walked the tree line when the power went out. The older folks never said werewolf out loud, not even when the coffee was cold and the sun was bright. They said it. They said that thing. They said what comes when you ignore the warnings. They taught their kids not to whistle after dark, not to hang sheets outside on full moon nights, not to walk alone past the old Weber place once the town siren finished its 9 p.m. sweep. But rules, like legends, are only as strong as the people who keep them. And some people don't realize they're breaking a rule until it's already inside. Their home. Eli Hart was one of those people. His sister Mara was the other. They had grown up side by side in that blue house on the edge of the pines, sharing comic books, hand-me-down coats, and the same window view of a sky that never quite learned how to be gentle. Their father left early, their mother worked late. For a long time it felt like Eli and Mara against the world. 2 kids with scraped knees and the shared religion of we've got each other, so we'll be fine. The first crack in that feeling came in late September, on a night when the moon rose too large and too fast. Mara didn't sit with him on the couch that night like she usually did. Instead, she stayed in her room with the door half closed, the light leaking out in a thin band across the hallway. The television filled the living room with canned laughter and soft blue flicker, and Eli lay there, remote limp in his hand, staring more at the reflection in the dark window than at the show. That was when he noticed something wrong in the glass. At first he thought it was just a smear or a trick of the lamp. Behind him, the reflection showed the outline of his head, the sagging couch, the doorway to the hall, and just beyond that, a figure standing in the shadow, watching. He turned his head. The hallway was empty. In the reflection, it was in the glass. The figure in the glass was taller than Mara by an inch or 2, shoulders too broad, head tilted at an angle that made the neck look too long. The ambient glow from the TV caught gleams along what might have been hair, might have been fur, a suggestion more than a detail. He blinked hard. The figure vanished. The hallway remained empty. He told himself he was tired, that the old stories the fry cook at the diner liked to tell had gotten under his skin, that the sound from behind the house the night before hadn't actually ended on his sister's name. He didn't go check on her. In towns like Dry Creek, there are rules everyone knows and a few rules no one admits out loud. Don't walk past the Weber place after 9. Don't drive toward the quarry if the fog is already on the road. And if something in your house starts making shapes where there should be none, don't pretend you didn't see it. He broke that last one. The next morning, the first physical sign appeared. Eli found her at the kitchen sink with her sleeve rolled up, rinsing blood from her wrist. It ran down in bright runnels, swirling into pink spirals in the stainless steel. The cut was long and jagged, closing in a way that didn't look quite right, like the skin was pulling in unnatural directions. What happened? He asked, grabbing a paper towel. Mara flinched away from his hand, pulling her arm back too fast. For a second, something in her eyes flashed amber, not brown, and then it was gone. Dog at the Weber property, she said, too quickly. It got through the fence, a small laugh, brittle at the edges. You know how those strays get. There hadn't been dogs at the Weber place for years. The old house sat rotting behind a rusted gate, its porch caved in, its windows blind. No one went near it. In Dry Creek, some places just belonged to the dark. He looked at the wound more closely. It didn't look like a dog bite. It looked like something with a long, narrow jaw had pressed teeth into her and then changed its mind halfway through. You should get a tetanus shot, he muttered. I'm fine, she said. He watched her wrap the wrists with practiced hands, as if she'd done it before. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence between their breaths. Outside, the trees leaned together against a wind he couldn't feel. You can tell a lot about a town by what it doesn't report. Over the next few weeks, things started going missing along the tree line. At first it was rabbits and raccoons, then a goat from Riga Miller's little backlot, then 3 of the neighbors' chickens, all in one night. Whatever got them didn't eat clean. The yards looked like something had tried to remember what hunting was supposed to be and only gotten halfway there. The sheriff chalked it up to coyotes. People nodded and pretended they believed him. No one mentioned the old stories about something bigger that used to come down off the ridge when the winters were bad and the fences too thin. Dot in the Hart house. The changes came more quietly. Mara started sleeping later, her alarm blaring through the thin walls without reaching her. She stopped eating breakfast, saying everything made her stomach hurt. She spent long stretches in the shower, the pipes groaning with the effort, the hot water bill spiking for the first time in years. At night, Eli heard her pacing in her room. The boards creaked in slow, circling lines, like something measuring the size of a new cage. One evening, when the moon was a swollen white coin barely rising over the pines, he made the mistake of opening her door without knocking. She had her back to him, shoulders bare, head hanging. For a heartbeat, he thought she was just getting dressed. Then he saw the way the muscles bunched under her skin, the way the tendons in her neck stood out too far, too sharp, or her spine moved. Not in the way a person shifts their weight, not the subtle sway of ribs under breath. It moved like something underneath was pushing up against the bone, testing its strength, tracing the outline of a shape that didn't belong. "Mara?" he whispered. She jerked around. Her eyes were wild and wet, the color wrong in the low light. Her lips peeled back a fraction too far when she grimaced, as if new teeth were crowding old ones. "Get out," she said, voice hoarse. "Eli, please. Not tonight." He closed the door. He didn't sleep. In small towns, legends aren't meant to scare you away from the dark. They're meant to tell you what lives there and what it expects from you. Dry Creek's oldest whispered. Rule was this: if someone starts changing under the wrong kind of moon, you don't keep it a secret. You tell the elders, you tell the sheriff. You lock them away, or you send them out into the trees and hope the trees take them. It had been years since anyone needed that rule. Eli pretended he'd forgotten it entirely. The next full moon came early, a pale thing hiding in thin clouds, and with it, the first sound that proved the legends hadn't forgotten them. It started as a low, frustrated groan from Mara's room. Then the bed frame slammed against the wall, once, twice, hard enough that the picture in the hallway jumped on its nail. Eli was already halfway down the hall when he smelled it. A hot, metallic scent, like pennies sucked between teeth. "Mara?" he called through the door. There was no answer, just ragged breathing. He touched the knob. It was hot. "Open the door," he whispered, though he didn't want it to open. Something on the other side dragged across the floor, heavy and deliberate. The shadow under the door shifted, stretched in ways that didn't make sense. For an instant, he saw the outline of a hand flatten against the crack, fingers too long, joints wrong, nails scraping shallow grooves into the wood. He stepped back. On the other side, his sister made a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl. "I'm okay," she choked. "I just need you to not come in. Whatever you hear, Jess, don't." Her voice broke on a growl that rumbled low in her chest, too low for a human throat. Bones popped, slow and wet. Eli braced a hand against the wall to stay upright. His heart ran ahead of him, sprinting toward every story the old fry cook had ever muttered over burnt hash browns. He thought of the way the town siren used to sound, different on some nights, longer, as if warning something more than curfew. "Do you want me to call a doctor?" he asked, because people asked stupid questions when they were standing at the edge of the world they used to know. She laughed. A short, broken thing. "They can't fix this," she said, and the "this" came out on the back of a growl that raised the hair on his arms. Outside, somewhere behind the house, something answered. It wasn't a coyote. The sound was deeper, more resonant, as if the trees themselves had thrown their voices together. It rolled through the thin insulation, through the plaster, through Eli's skin, and got stuck in his bones. When the howling stopped, the town went to quiet. Neighbors would later say they heard nothing out of the ordinary that night, that the only strange thing was how the power flickered once around midnight and then came back stronger than before. None of them would say they heard the second howl, the one that ended on a name not spoken in years. A few days later, the first human in Dry Creek went missing. Reagan Miller found her cousin's truck still running at the edge of the Weber property gate, driver's side door open, headlights blaring into the overgrown yard, the steering wheel sticky with blood. No footprints leading away, no drag marks, just clawed ruts in the dirt, as if something had knelt down beside the vehicle and then risen, on legs that didn't care about human posture anymore. The sheriff closed off the road, told everyone to stay away from the Weber place until further notice. People started locking their doors again. Church pews filled, the town's old stories crawled out of the corners, whispering their way back into coffee shops and hardware aisles. In the blue house at the edge of it all, Eli watched his sister bleed under her fingernails. It was subtle at first. He saw it when she came home late one evening, shoulders hunched, hoodie pulled low, as she reached up to flip off the porch light. Her sleeve rode back just enough for him to see the half-moons of her nails clogged with something dark, something that didn't look like dirt. "Mara," he said. She froze, hand on the light switch, breathing loud in the quiet. "Don't," she warned. "What did you do?" She turned slowly. Her face looked like she'd been crying for hours, eyes rimmed red, cheeks streaked. There was something else in her expression too, though. Something hungry and ashamed of its own hunger. "I tried to stay away from them," she whispered. "From everyone. I really did." He stepped closer. The smell hit him then, faint but unmistakable. Old blood and wet fur, and something that made his brain want to pretend it was just mud. "You're not okay," he said. Her laugh cracked. "You think?" Under the porch light, her eyes caught a slice of brightness and held it too long, pupils thinning in a way that made his stomach twist. Tell me what's happening, he said. Mara looked past him, out at the tree line. The pines swayed only at their tops, their trunks unnaturally still, as if trying not to draw attention. You know those stories Mum used to tell? She said softly. About why you don't look straight at the moon on some nights. About how it's not always just a rock in the sky. He swallowed. She said sometimes it's an eye, he murmured. Sometimes it picks someone. Mara's lips trembled. Yeah, she whispered. It picked me. The night thickened around the word. She told him then, in fits and starts, about the first time she realized the stories were more than folklore. How she'd been walking past the Weber place on a dare months ago, the moon fat and low and too bright. How she'd felt something tug at the center of her chest, like an invisible hook pulling her forward. They say no one goes by thereafter. 9, Eli said numbly. I know what they say, she snapped. I just didn't think it applied to me. I thought I was smarter than the stories, okay? She'd climbed the fence, walked up to the sagging porch steps, felt the borders of the town's old safety net give way around her. There was something inside the house, she said. Not like a thing I could see. Just this pressure, like the air was full of someone else's breath. I heard the howl behind the house, and then she touched her wrist, fingers brushing the faint scar. It didn't bite me, she whispered. Not all the way. It pressed its teeth in and tasted, like it was checking if I was compatible. Her voice faltered. It chose you, Ely said, hating the way his voice shook. Yeah, she said, and it doesn't like to be ignored. From that night on, the moon felt heavier over Dry Creek. On some evenings, clouds would roll in from the ridge and break around it, leaving the town in a strange half-light that made colors look wrong. People started seeing things out of the corners of their eyes. Something too tall behind parked cars, a shadow moving on all fours across rooftops, claw marks on second-story windowsills. Eli started seeing things in the television. It began one night when he and Mara tried to pretend they were still normal. They made popcorn, picked a movie, sat on the couch side by side while the DVD menu hummed, the screen casting blue and white over the room. For a while, it almost worked. They made fun of the dialogue, argued about whether the monster looked fake, tossed popcorn at each other when a jump scare failed to do its job. Then the power flickered. The movie froze mid-frame, the screen smearing light across their faces, a hum built in the walls, something low and unsettling. Eli's skin prickled. Did you pay the bill? Mara asked weakly. He didn't answer. He was looking at their reflection in the darkened lower half of the TV. He saw his own outline, a dim shape with tired eyes. He saw the couch, the lamp, the hallway door at his right. And he saw his sister, except the version of her in the glass wasn't the one sitting beside him. In the reflection, Ma's head was turned toward him, though he could see out of the corner of his eye that she was still staring at the frozen movie frame. The reflected version's lips were pulled back too far, stretching skin over teeth that had become long and thin and sharp. Her eyes glowed faintly, catching light from a source not present in the room. Something like fur bristled along her jawline and the top of her hand where it lay between them on the cushion. The worst part was the expression. She looked hungry. Ely swallowed hard. Mara, he whispered. The reflection snapped its gaze toward him's eyes narrowing. The real Mara finally turned her head at the sound of her name. What? She asked. The reflection's mouth moved first, slightly out of sync. You see it, don't you? It seemed to say, though no sound came from the screen. Then the power came fully back, flooding the room with motion and sound. The movie resumed. The reflection smoothed out. leaving only two tired siblings staring ahead. Eli stood abruptly. "I need some water," he muttered, stumbling toward the kitchen. He gripped the counter until his knuckles whitened, breathing fast. The fridge hum, the tick of the clock, the faint roar of sound from the TV, none of it could cover the slow scrape of claws in the back of his mind, the sense that something had just tested him. Ask the locals about that night. They'll look away before answering. The next day, he started looking for answers in places no one wanted him to go. Dry Creek had a library, but his shelves were thin on anything older than the town's founding. What it did have was a locked cabinet behind the genealogy section, a place no one touched unless someone died and needed their relatives tracked down. The key lived in the librarian's top drawer. It wasn't hard to borrow. Eli waited until Mrs. Garland went on her smoke break, then eased open the glass doors. Inside, among brittle birth records and yellowed property disputes, he found a slim, hand-bound volume with no title on the spine. Inside, the pages were dense with cramped handwriting, ink faded but legible. The first entry was dated 1893. He read until his vision blurred. The stories were all the same in their bones. A person walking past the wrong place at the wrong time. A full moon too big and too bright. A sense of being looked at from inside. The light. Wounds that didn't heal like they should. Strange cravings. The tug of the tree line at night, like a word stuck at the back of the tongue. The old ones didn't call it a werewolf. They called it the choosing. The thing in the Weber ravine picks a body when it gets restless. One entry read, "Not always to use it, sometimes to keep options open." Marked ones feel it when they try to leave town. Like hooks in the lungs. Most don't get far. Another said, "No one survives the night it chooses. Not all the way. Part of you goes with it. The part that used to turn away from the moon." The last few pages of the book were missing. Torn out so violently the binding threads had snapped. He closed the volume with shaking hands. Locals say the moon never glows the same after that night. When he came home, Mara was sitting on the front, Step's arms wrapped around her knees despite the cold. Her breath plumed in front of her in shallow bursts. Her pupils were small slits in an iris too bright. "You went looking," she said without turning. "You're Mart," he managed. "It chose you. It's been using you like an anchor, a doorway." She laughed softly. "You always were good with metaphors. How long do we have?" he asked. Her shoulders stiffened. "Until I stop being able to say your name," she whispered. "Until I look at you and don't recognize you as mine anymore." That night, the transformation stopped pretending to be subtle. He heard it in her bones first. A slow, grinding series of pops and groans from her room, accompanied by guttural gasps that didn't sound like they belonged to a human mouth. Her door shook in its frame. The light under it pulsed, as if the bulb were flickering in time with some unseen heartbeat. Eli stood in the hallway, forehead pressed to the plaster, listening. He heard muscle fibers tear and knit. He heard actual claws scrabble against the floor, as if they didn't quite know how to support weight yet. He heard his sister sobbing, the sound warping mid-breath into something that wanted to be a howl. He wanted to run. Instead, he went to the back door. The old legends had rules, and one of them burned bright in his mind now. If the marked one couldn't control it, you were supposed to tell someone. Bring them to the church, call the elders. Let the town deal with the consequences. He opened the door. The forest waited in a black wall at the edge of the yard. The pines were too still. Somewhere deep among them, something large moved. The sound like a bear dragging a carcass through undergrowth. Eyes flashed once between trunks. reflecting a color no animal's gaze should hold. He thought of calling the sheriff. He imagined the questions, the search, the desperate prayers. He imagined his sister in a cage, or worse, in the crosshairs of guns that never stopped shaking. Her scream from the bedroom cut through his imagination like a blade. Without fully deciding, he closed the door, turned the deadbolt, turned away from the town and everything it might do. He chose her. In doing so, he chose the monster too. From then on, his nights became a series of negotiations with something he couldn't fully see. He nailed blankets over her window, not to keep prying eyes out, but to block the moon. He stocked the fridge with raw meat under the guise of trying a new diet, telling the butcher nothing, handing over damp bills with a hand that shook only when he was alone. He called her in sick to work, to friends, to anyone who might wonder why she was only seen at dusk now, hood up, sunglasses on, even in the rain, when the howls came from behind their house. Closer and closer each time. He turned up the TV volume. When the news reported animal attacks on the outskirts of Tonahika, gone, a pair of campers never checking back in, he changed the channel before the details emerged. It's amazing how much horror can hide in the word protect. One night, near the height of winter, the air so cold it felt brittle. He forgot to close the latch on the back door. He realized it when he woke to the smell of frozen earth and something coppery drifting down the hallway. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something big is holding its breath. "Mara?" he called. No answer. Her room was empty. The blankets over her window hung in shredded strips. The bed sheets were tangled, clawed through, damp with sweat and something darker. His heart sprinted ahead of him, into the yard, over the frost-stiff grass, to the back door, hanging slightly ajar. Outside, the world had gone still. Footprints led away from the house, not quite human, not quite animal. They started as bare feet, then widened, lengthened, toes spreading, nails gouging deep crescents with each step. Halfway across the yard, they dropped to all fours. Beyond the fence, something had crashed through the underbrush in a wild, desperate run. Broken branches pointed the way like a trail of accusations. He could have turned back, called the sheriff, let the town do what towns do when confronted with something that doesn't fit inside their myths anymore. Instead, he grabbed his coat and flashlight and followed. The forest swallowed him in 3 steps. The pines crowded close, their branches knitting overhead to block out what little moonlight had made it through the clouds. His breath puffed in front of him, a thin banner marking his progress. He heard her before he saw her. The sound came from a small clearing ahead, a wet, miserable whine that rose and fell like someone trying not to cry. He clicked off the flashlight out of instinct, letting his eyes adjust to the sickly grey wash of moonlight that filtered through the gnarled limbs. She was crouched at the far side of the clearing, back hunched, hands buried in something he tried very hard not to recognize. Her shape was wrong. Her arms were too long. The muscles roped and thick under skin stretched to its limit. The bones of her shoulders jutted at new angles, pushing against flesh that had grown too tight. Tufts of dark fur had erupted along her spine and the backs of her arms in uneven patches, as if her body couldn't decide whether to commit. Her head hung low, hair plastered to her face with sweat and blood. When she lifted it, slowly, he saw that her mouth didn't know how to close all the way anymore. "Eli," she said, "Dot." Or rather, she tried to. His name came out warped, half growl, half plea, tongue thick around syllables that no longer fit. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the meager moonlight. Their color was no longer simply brown. Threads of molten amber had crept outward from the pupil, burning through what she'd been. He didn't look at what lay under her hands. He looked at the terror fighting the hunger in her expression. "I didn't mean to," she rasped. I just woke up out here and it was already. She looked down, her shoulders shook. He could smell it now. Blood, hot and sharp, mingled with the wild, animal musk of something that didn't belong in human lungs. His stomach rebelled. He swallowed it down. You need to come home, he said. I can't, she whimpered. I can't trust myself. You don't understand, Eli. Sometimes it's like I'm at the back of my own skull, watching someone else move my hands. It likes you. It doesn't want to hurt you. But everyone else. She let the sentence die. Something moved at the edge of the clearing. Eli turned his head, heart lurching. Between the trees, a pair of eyes watched them set too high for any normal animal. They blinked once, slowly. The air hummed with presence. He didn't feel threatened, exactly. He felt praised. The eyes shifted from Mara to him and back, as if weighing something. Then, as silently as they'd appeared, they vanished into the dark. She saw them too. He watched the last of her humanity flinch. It's getting closer, she whispered. Whatever was in the Weber ravine, it doesn't have to stay in the house anymore. It can walk with me. He knew in that moment that the legends had left something out. They spoke of a chosen body, a cursed one, a vessel. They hadn't said what happened to the person who refused to give that vessel up. They hadn't said what it would do to their mind. Somewhere in the town, a siren wailed, faint and distant. Midnight, or a little past. The sound threaded through the trees like a warning. He held out his hand. Come home, he said again. She hesitated. The muscles in her arm rippled, skin crawling with the effort of resisting instinct. Then, slowly, she reached for him. Her fingers were longer now, nails thickened into blunt claws that scraped his palm. Her skin was hot, feverish, pulsing with a heartbeat that didn't match his. He didn't let go. He led her back through the trees, through the torn fence, across the frostiff yard, into the house that had once been theirs and now belonged to a third, invisible tenant. That was the night he realized protecting her meant protecting it too. The next few months blurred into a ritual of small lies and bigger silences. He told the sheriff he'd heard nothing the night Reagan's cousin disappeared. He told their mother on the phone that Mara was just tired when she asked why her daughter sounded so far away. He told himself that he could control this if he just learned its rules. The rules revealed themselves slowly. Rule 1. Don't let us see the full moon directly. Its light accelerated things, pulled the beast forward like a tide. Curtains had to be thick, blankets had to stay pinned. If she so much as glimpsed it in the mirror, her breathing changed. Rule 2. Keep her fed. Not with what it wanted, that would have broken him, but enough that its hunger grew sluggish. Rare meat, bone marrow, things the butcher could pretend were 4 stews. Rule 3. Never let her be alone outside after dark. The more time she spent in open air under starlight, the more the woods watched. The more the woods watched, the more the thing from the Weber ravine pressed its face against the inside of her skull. There were slip-dash-ups. Once he fell asleep on the couch and woke to the front door wide open, cold air knifing through the house. He found her in the middle of the street, half-crouched, head tilted toward the ridge, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her eyes glowed faintly in the streetlight. Mara, he called softly. She jerked, muscles bulging under her hoodie. For a second, the thing inside her peered out, unmasked, and he saw it recognize him. Not as prey, as an ally, a collaborator. She shuddered, clamped her hands over her ears, and stumbled back inside without a word. Another time, he came home to find claw marks on the living room wall, deep, parallel grooves that scored the paint down to plaster. In front of them, the TV screen had been shattered in a spiderweb of fractured glass, as if something inside it had finally pushed back too hard. He swept up the shards with trembling hands, thinking of their reflection on that frozen movie night, wondering if the thing had been practicing then. The town didn't stop changing either. More animals went missing. The sheriff's reports grew thinner, the explanations shorter. People started leaving their porch lights on all night again, a throwback to older times. The diner closed earlier. The church opened its doors longer. Rumors sprouted like fungus in damp corners. Someone said they'd seen a creature on the ridge at dusk, silhouetted against the sky, taller than a man, hunched and thick-limbed, its head thrown back in a silent howl. Someone else swore they'd found prints on their roof. Not paw, not boot, something in between. Still, no one said the word the old legends had used. They didn't have to. The stories were starting to write themselves in fresh blood. The night everything broke began like any other. With a lie, Mara stood in the narrow entryway, coat half-zipped, hood up despite the calm evening. Her eyes were darker than usual, the amber threads thickening. Her lips were dry, cracked at the corners. "I just need to get some air," she said. "I feel like the walls are leaning." "You know what night it is?" he said. The calendar on the kitchen wall was already marked. A small silver circle around the date, drawn by his hand the day he realized the pattern. Every attack, every disappearance. Every night she woke up with blood under her nails, they all lined up with it. "I'll stay at the edge of town," she promised. "I'll keep my hood up. I won't look up. If I stay in this house another minute, Eli, I'm going to tear the floors up with my teeth." He believed her. Sometimes, the way she spoke scared him more than anything the legends had promised. "Half an hour," he said quietly. "And you call me every 10 minutes. You hear me?" She nodded, eyes shining. "You're the only thing keeping me human," she whispered. He watched her walk down the street until the dark swallowed her. The first call came on time. Her voice was tight but controlled. "I'm just walking past the pharmacy," she said. "Mr. Long's got those ugly snowmen out again." "Come home soon," he told her. "I will." The second call came late. "Where are you?" he asked, pacing. "By the Weber place," she said, his blood iced. "You said you'd stay at the edge of town." "I tried," she said, voice frayed. "It's like the road turned under my feet. I keep ending up here, Eli. It wants me close." In the background, he heard something move, heavy, slow, like a large animal shifting its weight. Then a low hum, almost like a purr, vibrating through the cheap plastic of the phone. "Get away from there," he hissed. "Now, right now, I don't think I can," she whispered. "It feels good here, like less tight, like my bones can breathe." The line crackled. For a second, he thought he heard another voice layered under hers, not speaking words, just exhaling. Amused, he didn't hang up. He grabbed his keys and ran. The Weber place loomed at the top of a small hill, its silhouette broken and jagged against the sky. The moon had finally fully risen, an obscene, swollen coin that painted everything in flat, merciless light. The road leading up to the gate was empty, but the air felt thick with attention. He found her inside the rusted fence, standing in what used to be the front yard. The house behind her sagged under the weight of decades. The front door hung open, darkness pooling in the threshold. Mara's coat lay discarded on the ground. Her hoodie dangled from one arm, sleeve torn to ribbons. Her skin glowed in the moonlight with a sheen of sweat. Her muscles twitched under the surface, as if something inside her was scratching to get out. "Mara," he called. She didn't turn right away. "It's clearer here," she said softly. "Do you feel it? Back home, it's like being underwater, everything muffled. Here, it's like standing at the surface. I can hear it. I can hear me." A voice slid between registers, human tones fraying at the edges. "You're not safe here," he said. "No one is." "That's the point, isn't it?" she murmured. "The legends say, once it chooses, no one survives the night. Not all of them meant dying." He stepped closer. The air vibrated, almost imperceptibly, like a low, continuous growl. "What does it want?" he asked. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were almost entirely amber now, pupils thin. Her teeth had lengthened, pushing her lips into a near-permanent snarl. A thin line of blood ran from her nose down to her lip, where it pooled before dripping to her chin. "It wants to stop being alone," she said. Something moved in the doorway behind her. Eli's breath caught. The shape in the darkness was enormous, blocking out the warped wallpaper and collapsed furniture behind it. He could make out the curve of a shoulder, the slope of a massive head. Ears pricking forward, eyes opened in the dark. They glowed a dull, ancient gold, older than the paint on the walls, older than the house, older than the town. They settled on him with a weight that made his knees weaken. The thing in the Weber ravine had come home. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate, into the wash of moonlight spilling through the door. Its body was wrong in ways even myths didn't capture. Too long in some places, too short in others, as if constructed from old memories of wolves and men stitched together without regard for comfort. Fur hung in thick, tangled mats along its shoulders and spine, but its chest was almost bare skin, crisscrossed with scars that shimmered in the cold light. Its hands, because they were hands, not paws, ended in claws curved like sickles. Its legs bent backward, then forward, then seemed to decide halfway, joints flexing in unnatural directions. Its jaw was massive, teeth crooked and old, as if they'd been filed on stone in anger. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. Mara swayed. "When it chose me," she said, voice trembling, "it didn't just put itself in me. It put something of me in it. We're connected. It feels what I feel. It sees you the way I do." The creature's gaze slid from her to Eli. For a heartbeat, he saw something almost like curiosity in its eyes. Recognition, even. Not of him, exactly. Of his place in the story. "It won't kill you," she whispered, "if I don't let it. That's part of the bargain." He didn't remember agreeing to any bargain. But as the thing took another step forward and did not lunge, did not raise its claws, did not bare its teeth in his direction, he understood it would let him live as long as he helped her keep it fed. He thought of the missing hikers, the animals torn apart, the way the sheriff's reports had grown thinner, then quieter, then almost non-existent. "You knew," he said hoarsely. "On some level, you knew what it was doing with you." She nodded, eyes shining. "I thought if I guided it, if I steered it toward the ones who wouldn't be missed as much, maybe I could buy time. Maybe I could figure out how to undo it." "There is no undoing," the old stories had said. In ink, he could still smell on his fingers. "Only choosing which part of you it gets." The creature shifted its weight, claws scraping softly on the warped floorboards. The sound sent a bolt of cold through his spine. "You have a choice now," Mara said. "You can walk down that hill, go to the sheriff, tell him everything. They'll come with guns and prayers and all their old rules. They'll die trying, and I'll either die with them or go fully over. No more Mara, just it. No one will be safe then. Her voice broke. Or, she whispered, you can do what you've been doing. Help me hide it. Help me direct it. Keep the town mostly safe. Keep Mum from knowing. Keep me, what's left of me. The moon hung above them, pale and watching. Ask yourself, if you're listening to this, sitting in your own quiet room, which would you choose? Eli stood on the cracked path leading up to the Weber house, breathing in air that smelled like rot and pine and old decisions. The thing in the doorway watched him. His sister, half transformed, trembled between them, bridge and barrier, victim and weapon. He thought of their childhood, of the time she broke her arm, falling out of the tree in their yard, and insisted she was fine, until he noticed the angle of the way she'd sat beside his bed when he had nightmares, hand on his shoulder, grounding him. He thought of the town, the people who had loaned them, shoulda fixed their roof, come to their father's funeral. He thought of the legends and how they always left something out. No one survives the night it chooses. The book had said, maybe survival meant something different here. He stepped forward. I'll help you, he said. Mara sagged with relief, knees buckling. The creature in the doorway let out a soft, rumbling exhale that might almost have been contentment. But we do it my way, Eli added, voice shaking but firm. No kids, no one from town if we can help it. We find the ones who are ready. Walk on edge as the drifters, the ones who hurt others. If this thing needs blood, we make sure it's not innocent. It was a horrible compromise, a monstrosity in itself. But sometimes the choices you get aren't between good and bad. They're between different flavors of wrong. Mara looked at him as if he'd just flung himself into the same pit she was, drowning in. Eli, she whispered. You don't have to yes, he said. I do. Because that's what love looks like in some stories. Not flowers, not promises. Just stepping into the dark with someone and agreeing to hold. The door closed behind you. The creature tilted its massive head. Its eyes, for the first time, looked almost proving. From that night on, the disappearances changed. Not in frequency, not in brutality, but in pattern. Men with warrants on their heads. Strangers who shouted at waitresses and grabbed too tight. Hunters who left dogs tied up in the cold. People who treated the town like a place to bleed instead of a place to live. They parked their trucks too close to the ridge. They walked past the Weber place after closing time. They took roads no one local took at night. Eli watched. He listened. He made quiet, awful decisions. Sometimes he left doors unlocked. Sometimes he forgot to warn someone about which path not to take home. Sometimes he woke up to the smell of blood on the wind and told himself this was the least terrible version of an impossible story at home. Mara changed more. Her transformations grew quicker, less painful only because her body had stopped resisting. Her features settled into a terrifying, tragic mix of girl and wolf, neither full or winning. Some nights she paced on all fours, claws ticking on the hardwood. Others she sat at the table, hunched over a mug of coffee she didn't drink, hands wrapped around it as if remembering what warmth used to mean. They spoke less. When they did, their conversations were lined with things that never made it into words. Do you hate me? She asked once, eyes more wolf than human in the faded kitchen light. He thought about it. I hate what it did to you, he said. I hate that it chose you. I hate that the only way to keep you is to become this. He glanced at his hands. They were clean. They would always be clean. That was part of the terrible bargain too. His body remained untouched, his nails unbloodied. The monster wore her skin, not his. That didn't make him innocent. But I don't hate you, he finished. Sometimes, late at night, when the town was asleep and the forest was singing its low, endless song, he'd catch his own reflection in the dark TV screen. He never saw fur. He never saw glowing eyes. He saw a man who had helped the monster hide. Ask the locals about that stretch of years. They'll tell you Dry Creek was calm. Fewer local deaths. More outsider trouble that never quite found its way into town. They'll say the moon felt heavier, but the streets felt marginally safer, and they never looked too hard at why. They won't talk about the blue house at the edge of the pines, or the way the curtains never opened on full moon nights, or the whispers that sometimes came through the walls when the wind was right. Half human, half not. And then, one night, it ended. Not with a gunshot, not with a mob, but with a decision. Mara stood in the doorway of his room, silhouette framed in the thin light from the hall. Her shape flickered between forms in his half-sleeping vision. One moment, his sister, the next, the hunched outline of something too large to fit through the door. I can't keep doing this, she said quietly. He sat up, heart already pounding. What happened? She stepped in, up close. He could see how thin she'd become. Not physically, her muscles were still taut. Her limbs still thick with the unnatural strength the thing had given her but in presence. Like she was fading at the edges. It's hungry all the time now, she whispered. And it's not just the bad ones it looks at anymore. When we're out walking, it looks at kids, at old ladies, at you. And I can feel how easy it would be to just let it. Just once. Just to see. Her voice shook. I don't want to know what that feels like, she said. I don't want to wake up with you under my nails. He swallowed. There has to be a way too. He started. There isn't, she interrupted. You saw the book. You know the stories. There's no cure. There's no ritual. There's just containment or surrender. He hated the way hope still tried to rise in him, weak and useless. What are you saying? He asked. She looked toward the window, where the curtain glowed faintly with moonlight. I'm saying I won't let it use me to walk into town, she said. Not completely, not without limits. He felt the bottom drop out of the world. You're not going out there alone, he said. She gave him a sad, small smile. You can't stop me this time, she said. Not where I'm going. There are places, in towns like Dry Creek, where the fabric between stories and reality runs thin. The Weber Ravine is one. The ridge where the wind always sounds like a howl is another. And then there's the old quarry lake, where the water never fully freezes and nothing thrown in ever quite comes back, right? He knew, in his bones, that that was where she meant to go. He followed anyway. The path to the lake wound past the last of the houses through brush that grabbed at his jeans, over rocks slick with old rain. The moon burned a hole in the sky above, its light so bright it seemed to erase stars. The air tasted like iron and endings. He found her at the edge of the water, standing on a slab of broken concrete that jutted out over the black surface. Her breath steamed in front of her in ragged bursts. Her reflection in the lake was more wolf than girl, eyes glowing, jaw wrong. You always hated swimming, he said, voice thin. She huffed a laugh. Still do, she said, but this isn't exactly that. He stepped up beside her. The water below moved sluggishly, ripples spreading in patterns that didn't match the wind. You don't have to do this, he said. I do, she replied, because if I don't, I won't be me much longer. And you'll keep choosing me over everyone else until there's nothing left in this town but us and it. She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the guilt, the horror. "And I won't make you a monster any more than I already have," she whispered. "I chose this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I love you enough to take the choice away now." Her hand brushed his. For a second, it was just skin on skin, sibling to sibling. Two kids on a couch, again in a house that hadn't yet learned how to groan under new weight. Then her fingers tightened, claws pressing gently against his palm, careful not to break the skin. "Don't follow me," she said. He couldn't answer past the lump in his throat. She stepped forward. For a moment, her body blurred, outlines smearing between forms. The wolf in her and the girl in her fought for posture. She ended up somewhere in between, hunched. And beautiful and terrible. She bent her knees, muscles coiling, and jumped. The splash was smaller than he expected, swallowed quickly by the dark. Ripples fanned outward, catching the moonlight. For an instant, her form was visible under the surface, limbs flailing, then stilling, then lengthening, then breaking apart into something that didn't obey anatomy. The water glowed faintly from within, then went dark. He waited. The legend said water could trap certain things, that the quarry lake was deep in ways that didn't make geological sense, that it liked to keep secrets. Minutes passed, the moon crawled higher. The wind picked up, sending small waves lapping against the shore. She didn't come back up. He sank to his knees on the concrete, breath coming in short, broken gasps. The water stared back, flat and uncaring. If this reminds you of something you've heard, you're not alone. The weeks that followed were quiet. The howls stopped, the disappearances slowed, then ceased. The animals that grazed at the tree line remained whole. The sheriff looked less tired. Dry Crete went back to a version of normal. People forgot to be afraid at night. They shouldn't have, because some nights, when the moon is high and thin, clouds fuzz its edges. If you stand at the edge of the quarry and listen, you can hear something moving under the surface. Not fish, not current, something bigger. Some nights, in the blue house at the edge of town, the television turns on by itself at 3 a.m. The screen stays dark, but a reflection appears in the glass. A couch, an empty room, a shape sitting where a girl used to sit. Her eyes glow faintly, her mouth doesn't quite close. She watches the empty space beside her, as if expecting someone to join her, as if waiting for a brother who made a choice and is still living with the echo. Eli doesn't watch the TV at night anymore. He keeps his curtains drawn even when the sky is clear. He hears the lake calling sometimes. In the far distance of his dreams a deep, slow heartbeat that isn't his. He tells himself he did what he had to, that he protected the town in the only way he could, that he loved his sister as fiercely as anyone could love and still survive it. The truth is more complicated. He didn't betray her to save others. He protected her until she had to become her own monster and make the choice for both of them. The town will call her a tragedy if it remembers her at all. The thing in the lake will call her something else. And the moon, on those nights when it hangs just wrong over Dry Creek, too bright, too watchful, will pour its gaze down on his little house and linger a fraction of a second longer on the darkened television screen. If you ever drive through a town like this and notice everyone closing their curtains before the moon fully rises, pay attention. If you ever hear a howl that sounds like it's coming from under the water instead of from the woods, remember this. Legends aren't meant to scare children. They're warnings carved into the dark by people who learned too late that the monsters don't always live outside. Sometimes they live in the choices you make, and the ones you let someone else drown with. If you're still listening, the night hasn't let you go yet. It likes the way you lean in when the word werewolf comes up, the way your breath tightens when bones pop in the dark. Stories like this don't end when the voice goes quiet. They linger in the corners of your room, in the shine on your black screen, in the way the shadows seem to twitch when you pass. If you've ever heard something in the woods that didn't sound quite like an animal, if you've ever seen eyes in a reflection that didn't belong to anyone in the room, leave a word below. Someone else might need your warning before the next moon climbs over their town. The legends keep people alive because they're shared, so share yours. And if you decide to come back to this place, to walk these dark roads and sit with these broken families again, mark your return by joining the circle that listens. The more of you there are, the louder these warnings carry when the night starts choosing. Until then, keep your curtains closed on the bright nights, and don't ignore the sound that comes from behind your house when everything else has gone quiet. If you've ever felt that pressure in the dark, that sense that something is standing just outside the frame of your life, leave a trace of it below. One word, one memory, one warning. Stories like this only survive if someone marks the trail for the next poor soul who wanders in. If you want more warnings before the next moon rises, stay close to Whispering Narratives. This is where the quiet towns and buried beasts keep telling on themselves. Listen with us. Stay in the circle. Subscribe before the next full moon.